My name is Diane Castle. My guest today is Dr. James Marsters. Dr. Marsters is an orthodontist who's been in private practice for 36 years in Pasadena, California. Dr. Marsters has earned a doctorate in dental surgery from New York University and a master's degree in orthodontics from the University of Southern California. In addition to being a highly respected orthodontist, Dr. Marsters is the person who encouraged the development of telephone communication for the deaf. And I'm very interested in learning more about that. And so, of course, that's the reason we've asked you to join us today. I've read that you were very frustrated because you couldn't use the telephone independently. I wonder if you could take us back to the time when deaf people did not have telephone communication devices, and tell us a little bit about what it was like then.
Yes, well, back in the 1950s and before then, and into the 1960s, I was very frustrated in not being able to use the telephone. Now, I would have an earpiece that I would fit into the base of a telephone, and I would give that earpiece to my roommate who was hearing, and he would listen for me what was being said, and he would tell me by oral interpreting what was being said on the other end of the line. Then I would be doing my own talking, my own thinking. That made me feel very good. Another way I would use the telephone, was that when I had no roommate or someone to help me. So I had a little device that was battery operated, and it would translate the busy signals or the ring signals into little light signals. So the rhythm would tell me what was happening on the telephone. So I would arrange for questions like, can I come over now? Yes, or no, or maybe. So there are 1, 2, 3 signals there. So that was very useful. But I wanted to find some way to help deaf people, my deaf friends, who could not speak well, who needed sign language. And you can't use sign language by using oral interpreting. So I was looking for a way to help my deaf friends.
Well, that's very interesting, because I know that in what we might call the old days, that deaf people had to walk to a person's home or drive to their home to find out if they were there, or to set up plans for what they were going to do, or they would have to ask someone else to call for them. So it really wasn't easy making contact with other people if you were deaf. Now, I know that you worked with Dr. Weitbrecht to develop the first acoustic coupler that was used for teletype communication. Can you tell us a little bit about how you and Dr. Weitbrecht met each other and got together?
Well, yes. I told some of my deaf friends that I was looking for someone that I could team up with and develop something to help the deaf people who could not talk. And it was difficult, for example, if I wanted to go visit a deaf friend who lived 2 hours drive away. And I would drive 2 hours like a lot of my deaf friends, and they wouldn't be home. Or I need to call a hospital, or call a doctor, or call these important people, the sheriff, the fire department, and you had no way of getting them. And it was very difficult. So a friend of mine by the name of Patsy McCune, who was deaf, and her hearing husband were on top of Mount Lassen. in California. Mr. McCune heard a deaf voice, and he went over and met Bob Weitbrecht. And so they met. And Patsy told Arthur Simon, a deaf friend in San Francisco. And Arthur knew I was looking for someone. Who was Bob Weitbrecht? Well, Bob was a deaf man who worked as a senior research physicist for Stanford Research Institute. He was very smart. He was a pioneer in astronomy. He had 2 degrees in astronomy from the University of California, Berkeley, and University of Wisconsin. But he was doing work primarily in electronics for Stanford. He was also a pioneer radio ham using old teletype machines. And the radio hams, some of them were using teletype instead of Morse code. So this was a perfect setup for me. And I wrote to Bob, and he responded, and then I went to San Francisco right away to get busy with him and see if he would be interested.
Now, I don't understand about the radio teletype and the Morse code. Could you just explain that very briefly? You said that Bob Weitbrecht was using the teletype instead of Morse code.
Yes.
Explain how that works.
All right. Well, the federal laws for a license in radio hamming require that you know Morse code. Well, Morse code for A is da-da. Da-da. B is da-da-da-da. Well, radio teletype is a different thing. It uses a different code. And it has 5, all letters have 5 sequences. And it depends on how you use those 5 sequences, you get the right letter. And the teletype sends that out in the form of a code over the radio waves. And it comes back that way. It is not voice into teletype. It is teletype to teletype over the radio waves.
I see. Okay. So then how did all of this lead to the development of the acoustic coupler?
Well, I sat down with Bob and we reviewed all the methods that the deaf possibly could use. There was the picture telephone that was shown at the 1939 World's Fair. Well, that was not perfect, and it was very expensive. What we wanted was something that all deaf people could use, that the cost was reasonable. We also considered a device that's called an auto-scribe, where you write on a machine, and another machine, another part of a hotel or place would write the same thing out. And that was too expensive for us too. And we thought about different ways of making it possible. And we thought that, well, maybe we could use all of these old teletype machines that are being phased out by the telephone company and by Western Union in favor of computer equipment.
So that was happening already. The teletypes were being phased out already, and you knew about that, or Bob knew about that, Bob Weitbrecht. And so you were trying to think of a way to use that equipment.
That is correct. And we hoped that it would be donated to the deaf.
I see.
And we would teach the deaf people how to repair them, how to maintain them. And we would develop the device that could be used on the telephone, through the cables undersea, and through the satellites. had to be highly reliable and of a low expense. So we worked on that in 1963, and we agreed that that seemed the right way to go. And so we developed the equipment, and then we had our trials locally, but the first long-distance call was from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Now, what's the difficulty about making a long-distance call? Well, when you use the telephone, have you noticed that when you use voice, you sometimes get echoes of the other person's voice on the telephone?
Yes, I've noticed that. Mm-hmm.
And it sort of gobbles up what you hear. All right, well, the teletype machine cannot tolerate. It cannot accept echo. So if they got echoes, they got a lot of garble.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So we made a patent, a signaling way to iron out all those echoes so that the acoustic coupler, or the modem for short, would not object to it. As a matter of fact, we could use our device for the fax machine today. It's probably being used for that and other things. It was very versatile. The patent did not apply to talking with deaf people or teletype exclusively.
Oh, I see.
But our focus was on helping the deaf people be able to use the telephone around the world. And we concentrated on that. We had our first demonstration in Salt Lake City in 1964.
Mm-hmm.
And there were quite a few deaf people from the National Association of the Deaf
Mm-hmm.
who came to the convention of the Alexander Graham Bell Association for the Deaf. And we showed them what we were doing, and they were very interested.
I'm sure they were very excited.
They were.
So then the challenge was, here you had these teletypes that were being phased out by different companies. And the challenge was to use that equipment and somehow connect it to work with the regular telephone. So what did the coupler do? What did this coupler that was developed, what did it do?
Well, it converted the teletype signals, which involved 5 pieces of information to make an A or a B or a C or anything else, and convert that into 2 frequencies on the telephone line. One was for the signal, the other one was to wipe out the echoes.
Oh, I see.
And that make it very highly reliable and fast. And use this old equipment. Well, we took a teletype and a modem to the main offices of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company in New York City, to the office of the corporate secretary. And he had the corporate lawyer and some other bigwigs in his office. And so Bob Weitbrecht and the Sachs, with another deaf man, and myself, the 3 of us were working together. And we put the equipment on his desk and asked permission to use his telephone. And we make a phone call to California from New York City. And they were amazed to see how easily we were talking right off the bat. And they were very impressed. And then they said, we will give you $3 million of old obsolete
Obsolete.
obsolete equipment if you will use our data phone line, which is used for computers. And I said, well, thank you very much. But tell me, sir, do you have a data phone line for computers at this desk here? He said, no. Do you have a data phone line for computers downstairs in the lobby in the public telephone? No. Does your mother have one at home? No. Do you have one at home? No. And I said, well, deaf people can't afford this expensive data phone line. It's too expensive. He said, well, if you agree, we will give it to you, all this equipment, if you will use the data phone line. And I said, I'm sorry, I cannot accept that offer. They said, well, why? They said, well, we have an antitrust suit against us by the Carter Phone Company, which has been put in their own equipment and the telephone in the oil fields of Texas or wherever, and sending the information to the computers. But they're using our telephone line, and they're putting what they want on our telephone. And we can't allow that, because if we do, or we permit you, then it will open up the whole field to any kind of equipment that anybody wants to put on the phone. And we can't permit that. I said, well, I'm sorry, what do you suggest we do? He said, well, I would like to see you stay away from our computer frequencies. And I said, we already have decided on staying away from your computer frequency because we want no conflict. But you can give your equipment to the National Association of the Deaf, or to the Alexander Graham Bell Association, or some other groups, and we will work together to try to distribute this equipment. So that's what they did eventually. But until then, we had to buy a lot of old equipment from Western Union, from RCA, and the AT&T, from the other hands. And it's very exciting now to be able to call people around the world. It's incredible.
That's right, it is. You brought up the word computer. And so I want to ask you, what is the difference between the computer modem and the acoustic coupler, which is also a modem? Can you briefly explain that?
Yes. Well, the deaf modem uses the Bardo code of 5 sequences. The computer mode, which is called ASCII, has 7 to 8 codes. And depending on the sequence you use. And the computer mode required 4 frequencies. Ours required only 2 frequencies, 2 different. But the computers can use only 2, or 4, or more. But the more signals you use, the less accurate that signal goes over the telephone line or through satellites in space, because there's more opportunity for it to be garbled. If you transmit 300 words in 5 level mode or Bardo as signal, you can send them much faster than you can send 8. You have a high reliability and accuracy. We had to keep the cost down. computer chips in those days and computer equipment were very, very expensive. We could afford it, but deaf people couldn't.
Well, do you think that computers will make TDDs or teletypes obsolete?
Not for some time. The reason for this is that many deaf people need simple equipment. They are afraid of computers. Lots of hearing people are afraid of computers. They don't want to touch them. They want something simple that they can understand. So if we have a computer unit that's extremely simple and inexpensive, I think more deaf people will go over to computers. But I think young people are more sophisticated, and they're willing to try the more sophisticated equipment. So eventually it will happen.
Right. Well, just as we're finishing up our conversation now, could you take a minute or so to talk about what you see in the future for telephone communication for deaf people?
Yes. Well, before I forget, the phone type itself can use 5 pieces of information or 50 or 100 pieces of information. It doesn't care. It depends on the equipment you use. But as for the future, I think there may be more what we call mailboxes. For example, you want to leave 10 or 20 or 100 of your friends a message from you. You don't want to call them up and get a busy signal. Imagine you couldn't call deaf people 30 years ago. Today you call them, you get a busy signal. You can call and leave your message in a mailbox. And that mailbox distributes that message to all your friends you're trying to reach. There are lots of possibilities. You go through cable, you go through a satellite, and you could do it for much less. It's a wonderful language developer too. I think the equipment will become lighter and smaller. The expenses will come down. There are many possibilities.
Well, it sounds very optimistic and wonderful for the future. Jim, I want to thank you very much for being with us today and talking about the history of teletypes as you were involved with it, and I know that a lot of people will be very interested in learning about the things that you've mentioned today. Thank you very much.
You know, Diane, I think that today is the day of the fax machine. You know, you write some things out on a piece of paper, like you have there, and you put it into the fax machine, and you send it to your friends right away. It's marvelous. But the students have to be able to know how to write before they get to use the fax machine.
Right. Well, they wouldn't be in college here if they didn't. Thanks again, Jim.
Thank you. Lots of fun.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, and thank you.